filmmaker. Reggie was born in Nigeria and lived there until the age of 15. He received his undergraduate degree in digital art from the College of New Jersey, his Master's of Fine Arts in Filmmaking from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2020, and has recently completed his first feature-length film, Nyam, which has won several film festival awards. Reggie is an interdisciplinary artist whose artistic practice is a celebration of his identity, a tribute to the resilience of his culture, and a call for connection. So without further ado.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for spending this time with me and learning about our culture and allowing me to share my story with you. It means a lot to me, and I am very, very grateful. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to acknowledge a few people that played a part in bringing this to life that are in the building. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my father, Dr. Patrick Dakum, who is in the building. If you could just wave. I definitely will not have been able to do any of this without his help. So I'm very grateful. I'd like to thank my twin brother too. He's in the building at the back, Plangji Dakum. I'd like to thank Ola, aka 7G. He helped with the music. He's one of the best producers in Baltimore. And then finally, I'd like to thank, before I thank Sankofa, I'd like to thank Mr. Jim Clemmer. I don't know if you saw him in here, the curator of the gallery at Sankofa. He was a huge influence in me paying attention to artifacts and wanting to be around all this art. So thank you so much for contributions. And then finally, I'd like to thank Sankofa and all the organizers. I think the first person I'd like to ask a question is Dr. Catherine John Clemmer. I'm interested in knowing, based on your experience migrating and living in so many different places and your knowledge in history, what out of this documentary do you see as a parallel in stories for melanated people globally? What is something that is consistent that you see like it's not unique to my story and that need for rediscovery?
Hello, everyone. Well, speaking from the heart, the thing that is not unique to your story, there were many things that were very interesting. As a matter of fact, I wish that your father was on the panel because, you would learn so much from being able to hear and ask questions. It's an immense knowledge. But the thing that I saw that I thought was similar to my experience as a Jamaican who migrated to the U.S. and who is also a descendant of enslaved Africans in the diaspora, is the role, how should I put it, I would say, I'm looking for the right word, I'm going to put it this way, the ambivalent role, because I'm going to say it bluntly, a positive and a negative, that Christianity played in relation to our understanding of ourselves culturally and historically, right? So in Jamaica, it functioned for people both as a force of colonial power and also in ways people used it because that's what they had access to, as a strategy of resilience and survival. But it came at the cost of often the demonization of the traditional culture, which then meant that there was turning one's back on some of the traditions of the culture that were not negative, right? So that's not, I want to take up a lot of time, so that's the direct answer.
That was well put. I'm happy that you even put it that way, because along the line of showing this documentary in different spaces, I've come across people who may interpret the documentary a certain way because of that impact that Christianity and colonial era of Christianity kind of had on our culture. There was positives, but there was also negatives, and there was baggage, and it probably led to one reason why I'm making this documentary, that need to reclaim our history and understand it outside of that context. So the next question that I'd like to ask is for Mr. Jim Clemmer. So one thing that helped me in understanding the role of art and the role of artifacts was when I walked into the gift shop on Charles Street, the Sankofa gift shop on Charles Street. So before this museum was what it is today, they were on a gift shop, a way smaller space than this on Charles Street. And so I was privileged to witness the move from there to here. But every time I went back, it was because of the wealth of knowledge that you have on the different artifacts and the regions they're from. And for those who may not know, there's a gallery down the hallway. There's a lot of different African artifacts. And Mr. Jim knows a lot about the traditions behind these artifacts. The question I have for you is, there is a knock sculpture in that gallery. One, when are we gonna have it back? I'm just playing. I'm just playing. The second question, the more important question, is how does watching this documentary influence your knowledge of that artifact? Prior to watching the documentary, you may have had some knowledge about the cultures and ethnic groups that are tied to that object. But after watching this, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, the knock piece in the gallery is a $5,000 fake. It's working? Yes. I had read about the knock, and a few months later, one of the vans of the dealers that we purchased these objects, this wonderful art from, was in front of our store, which was on Charles Street, near the Safeway Market in the 2400 block. And here was a van, and I saw them taking, the guys were taking things out, and here's this knot piece. And I went up and I said, you can put that back in. There's no way you could possibly afford that. Oh, no, Mr. Jim. We got this from a lady in New York who, ran into a problem financially, and she had to sell things at a very good rate to get money raised, to liquidate things and get money. And so we bought it. And, it was far more affordable than you would expect. But it's not real. It's a very well done piece, probably by an art student at some college. First of all, most knock pieces are busts from the chest up. It's a complete piece with all kinds of additions that just seem like there was a stretch in the creativity. But it is an interesting piece, and the face is wonderfully done. It is very much what you will see in Knock pieces. What I learned about Knock was, now someone in the film said 1949. What I had first read was in my first year of life, which was 1943. I was born in late 42, but in my first full year of life, 1943, they found 11 pieces in the process of digging a foundation or something like that. And at that time, there was no known connection, at least the reading I had done said there was no known connection to any tribes. Well, this film, suddenly I'm back there thinking, wow, you know, there's a much bigger connection than I had ever known. To me, it were just this wonderful, interesting mystery that created these things, and we just could not make a connection to anybody. But now I found out we can make a connection. So that to me is very exciting. Not hearing well, I didn't get all of your questions. Those of you who know me know I'm asking people to repeat constantly, continually. I apologize for that. My wife has been on me for hearing aid for a long time. I'm now convinced it's time.
No, you actually answered. I believe you answered all the questions. You're good. No, that was a great answer. That was well put, and that was pretty much what I've always hoped this documentary did, was to enlighten people past the false narrative that's been out there. And so,
May I say something? Go ahead. Before, as we're wrapping up, before you leave, those of you who have the interest, I will meet you at this case right here, this first display case. Yep. Because that large piece in there is, in my estimation, and many experts would agree, although perhaps not all, that may be the single most important piece of African tribal art in the world. Now, we don't have the only one. I don't mean it that way. There are at least 150 to 200 Onis of Ife. That's what that is, and I'll tell you about its importance when we finish.
nice. See, I told you, like, you know this a lot. So, Dr. Teisha, am I saying it properly?
Yes. You are.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Based on, I've watched a few videos, like I told you earlier, of you talking about history and talking about our identities, and I wanted to ask you this question: how do you feel the migration or displacement of melanated people across the U.S. affects us today in our understanding of our identity? Because I'll even expound further. When I first came to America, I was always confused by how there was no option for me to tick what I actually identify as. So Nigerian was the first thing that I was looking for, but I didn't see that. And the closest was African American or other. And I was always confused by what that meant or why I didn't feel, because I was fresh into the US, and over time I got to understand. But over history, there's been a classification of melanated people in different lights, from colored to Negro to black to, there's a lot. And so I've always been curious as to how we come to that and what that means for us.
Right.
So if you'd like to share, I know it was kind of all over the place.
No, I
but
got you.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here this evening. I've been up since 5 o'clock, so please bear with me. We had graduation today at Cotton State, so my babies have graduated. But anyway, to answer your question, I think one of the things that I'll speak as the Black American we struggle with is this whole push to divorce us from our African heritage. And of course that was by design, because here's the thing. If you're brought to shores, right, and you're telling individuals that you are inferior, that means I have to convince you that where you come from has no value, which means every Africanism that you've held, right, has no value. So in order for me to do that, I have to convince you that Africa is nothing. I have to convince you that there's something wrong with you. And for that reason, unfortunately, a lot of Black Americans have been indoctrinated to believe that. You know, luckily I had the parents I had, because by the time I got to grade school, I was already fortified with my mom telling me that your African blood is your superpower. It's not a handicap, it's your superpower. And I think a lot of times we feel as though if we don't hold on to our identity, that we're going to, if we step away from our identity, that we're going to be more, when in reality, our identity is something that we should be proud of. You know what I mean? And I think the thing that really bothered me, and I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but in 2018, a little movie came out. The name of the movie was called what? Black Panther, right? So you would see Afro-Caribbeans, African-Americans walking around, Wakanda forever. Everybody had on, you know, the kente and everything, and we're proud of ourselves now because we have Wakanda. But Wakanda is a fictitious place. We don't need Wakanda. We have the Nyam people. We have Axum. We have the Nubians. We have Egypt, you know, even though a lot of people tried to take Egypt out of Africa. And I don't know why, because I don't know, other than the Kardashians, I don't know any group of people that have more pictures of themselves. So there should be no confusion about what these people were and what they look like. But for some reason, we needed the Marvel Universe to create a fictitious version of Africa for us to be proud of ourselves. And I have no problem with that. Because, you know, even looking at your family story, which reminds me so much of my family story. Both sides of my family come from South Carolina. And my papa, who I saw in the film, I saw about 3 people that looked like my papa, was Kichi Gullah. And luckily we were isolated from Europeans, so we were able to hold on to more of our Africanisms than other African Americans. But I think it's very important that we don't try to demonize Africa and think that there's something wrong with us or that we're deficient because we are the diaspora. That's our superpower.
That was well put. Man, you gave me like, I love it. I love it. I'm happy to share this stage with you. So Dr. Catherine, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question to what she just talked about. One thing that was present was the narrative and how we shape the narrative and how we tell our story. Why is it important that we tell our story? From your background in film and hip hop, can you speak to that, but also art in general, and why it's important that contemporary art is intentional about shaping the narrative?
Okay, let me try. I think what I would say is that for those of us in the diaspora in particular, and on the continent, our history has been captured in things other than books, historically, right? Many of us, we know in the diaspora, for obvious historical reasons, it's hard to track and trace, you know, African ancestry beyond a certain point unless, you know, there was you were an exception in some way, right? But where we documented and held on to things were in songs, in proverbs, in folk tales, in dance, the way we cooked our food, humor, the philosophical worldview is probably one of the strongest indicators of, you know, culture, right? Our accents, you know, so a lot of times, particularly in the US, the people who have what may be called or considered the most, when people will say accent is really country, it's actually African attentions, right? I think that we tell our stories in a lot of ways, to bring up hip hop, the mastery with which some MCs can freestyle is just, it's something to think about, and so I think that art is the expression of spirit usually, right? It's even in the documentary, the comment was made that art is, in the West, it's used to just represent beauty maybe, right? But it always was functional, right? And for my research is all about the fact that our cultural and artistic expression in the diaspora was a strategy of survival, even though for outsiders it was, beautiful and maybe empowering, but it was literally, a manifestation, a beautiful manifestation of strategies of survival and resilience, right? So that's a quick way of saying.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. So I want to move to the audience, but I'd like to ask anyone on the panel if you have any questions for me.
Ladies first.
You go ahead.
Yes, my question for you is, it's a simple question, but I like the simple question. Did you find that you developed more appreciation and value for your home culture once you were in America? What was it about your experience here that led you to do the Sankofa move, look back to the past in order to move forward?
That's a great question. Although it's simple, it's not too simple. But the experience here happened when I was still shaping my identity of who I am in the face of these narratives of who I am that I didn't feel like was precise or accurate. I didn't feel was as accurate with who I am, from the racism that I faced and people who would tell me I am something that I knew I was not. And even down to trying to find community in America. That led me to the awareness of how different but similar melanated people are globally. And so it made me also realize that there was so much that I didn't know. And in order for me to be a part of any collective that was outside of where I was originally from, I felt like I needed to know more about where I'm from before stepping into any other space, because I felt like that was a foundation. I felt like that was going to be the foundation that would influence how I move anywhere, because I needed to learn about other people's cultures. I needed to learn about other people's ways of life, but I felt like I was cheating myself if I didn't go and learn about my culture first. And so that was, in summary, what led to me going back, because I also met people who didn't have that access to the cultures back on the continent, and I felt like I was taking my privilege for granted by not documenting or not going back, because I saw the need, that the yearning and the longing that a lot of people had, and so I'm like, well, I better go do this so I can share it with people, and then in the similarities that we all have, it could bring some fulfillment to the people around me who may not have that access. So that was in short what led to it, what led to that journey. And then also my parents always, like growing up, they always took us back to the village and the hometown that my dad is from. Now, because we were still young and, we didn't take anything seriously like that, we didn't realize what was happening. And especially because the education system is so jarring in Nigeria, it lacks education on the culture and the history the way it should. And so growing up, even though I had that from time to time, I didn't really realize that I wasn't paying full attention or I wasn't as present. And so when it's like when you take a fish out of water and then they realize that I can't survive, is how I started to feel. It's like, oh snap, I've actually not been realizing that being away from home could make me feel like I'm losing something, or I'm losing air, or I'm losing, something that's feeding my soul. And I like to say this to anyone that's never been to the continent. I think visiting is very key. There's something about the air that re-energizes you to come back here and want to move differently. And so, yeah, I'll stop there. So any question from the audience, for any of us on the panel, I'll be open. Anybody? Yes.
First off, this is really cool, really cool. I'm understating it, but it's very, very cool. I guess this could be considered a question for anyone, but you first. With everything that's been going on, and especially recently on the continent, especially in particular in West Africa, right above Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, all of those different things. What is the importance of just experiences like this, so screening and conversation, in terms of really understanding a way forward in the times that we are living in? Because they're very, very different times, and things can go either way, to be honest. But there is a lot of change that, like, a new world is trying to surface. So what is the importance of just experiences like consuming the art and having conversations about the art and experiencing all of it in total?
That's a tough question. But I think I appreciate that question. Before I go, will any of you like to answer?
After you.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so the importance of having screenings like this, the importance of having these conversations is, for example, documentaries are more grounded in reality. They humanize our identities, our cultures, our stories. So having these type of screenings grounds us in the human nature of a lot of the conversations that we have around our history and our culture and our traditions, and when we see how migration affects all of that, I think having these type of moments help us in thinking about the solution. If it's more education, if it's meeting people directly where they're at, I'll be honest, like, I'm still connected with the hometown that my dad is from. It's not like Jos, where it's like the city area. It's more like a village. And what I've realized is the needs that the people there have are different from the needs that people in Jos have. And sometimes it's not, it doesn't come off like how a village would. It's not just like a borehole that would fix like their issues. There's more to it, as we've seen from the panel, like our psychology and the way we view ourselves. There's layers to the issues and the problems and the state that we're in. So watching these kind of documentaries and having conversations around it help us like explain the layers more. So when we think about solutions or when solutions are being presented to us, we can like assess it in a different light. If someone came to my hometown and said they wanted to build a school, now I would ask them about the curriculum. I would ask like, okay, how are you telling our story, or how are you teaching our story? Because that's also important. So I'll stop there.
Well, I think documentaries like this are really important because obviously Black folks are not monolithic, but what it did do was highlight some of the similarities that we all share as melanated people, as you like to say, because I feel as though a lot of times there is an effort to pit Black communities against each other, i.e. the Black immigrant against the Black American, the Afro-Latin against the whoever. And I think, unfortunately, some of us buy into that, which is very unfortunate, because if I sit here and don't open my mouth, you don't know where I'm from. You know, so I always tell people, treat people the way you want to be treated, because God only knows, you know what I'm saying? And I feel as though when you show stories like your family story, you're humanizing the individuals, and just instead of just saying Nigeria. No, we want to see the culture, we want to see the people, we want to see how families interact with one another. And I think it's very important that we peel back the layers, because as a Pan-Africanist, I feel as though sometimes similarities will bring us together, but if we don't talk about those similarities, we're going to stay in our own separate little places, which to me is detrimental. So.
For me, I would say that, to go back to your question about the way forward, one of the reasons that I think that forums like this are very important is because our education system is not geared to help us figure out and solve some of these, many of these problems and challenges. So there's a lot that is left out of the education that we receive, even if it has a certain utility and value in another way. And so the way forward is going to come from us having conversations and coming up with strategies and, you know, meeting and, you know, planning, you know, in spaces, ironically, outside of school and work. That's
I'm not going to add to that, but I have a little moment to talk about this.
Exactly.
Because it ties in.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
My wife, who couldn't make it tonight because she's attending a conference for museum people. We were retail sellers of things, but then we came up with the idea of doing a museum like this. One of the main purposes of doing it is so that African American kids can feel good about their African heritage. There's so much to feel good about. You saw a lot of that in this film. Thank you. But there are certain things that are wonderful accomplishments that we don't learn about. And one of them is right here. In tribal art, most of the wood, masks, statues, and so forth, was not meant to be art. We consider it art today. It was Pablo Picasso's favorite art. He stated that. That's not my opinion. I believe it. He stated it clearly to his good friend Marcel Griol, a French ethnologist. But I want to talk about this piece because it really says a great deal. This guy right here is the Oni, O-N-I, king of the Ife. Ife is the holy city of a people called Yoruba. Not Yoruba, Yoruba. I hear a lot of people say Yoruba. It's the Yoruba. You'll never hear a Yoruba call themselves Yoruba. Their holy city is Ife. It's in today's Nigeria. But back in the 1200s, there was no Nigeria, but there was an Ife. And folks in Ife in the 1200s figured out how to do art. These three pieces are examples of something called lost wax casting. They're bronze. Lost wax casting is extremely difficult. They figured it out in the 1200s. And what you should know is that the first Europeans to arrive in Africa were the Portuguese. They were great sailors. Magellan, the first guy that circumnavigated the globe and all that. Well, it wasn't that big a trip to get from Portugal to the Gulf of Guinea and, the area of Ghana, Togo, and so on, Benin, and Nigeria. But in the 1200s, they figured this out. And in 1471, white folks arrived. So this incredibly difficult process was not only figured out, but it was taken to the level of high art and taught to the Ife's cousins, the Benin, who came from the Ife. Two Ife princes had a squabble. The loser of the argument said to his older brother, I'm going to take some of our folks and head out that way and create my own kingdom. And that's how Benin came into being. Chapters are written about this. I'm giving it to you in a couple sentences, but forgive me. At any rate, 1471 is when whites arrived. They figured this out in the 1200s. 2 centuries, 2 whole centuries before the Europeans got there. Remember, lost wax casting is extremely difficult to do. This had to be made in wax first. And so now the honeybee keeper, or the honeybee guy, had to risk his life, because African bees are big and aggressive, and they'll kill you. He had to now risk his life for something in addition to honey, because the only wax you could get was from bees. Yeah, today you can get wax called paraffin. That comes from oil. Nobody was drilling for oil in the 1200s, okay? So they had to use the wax from the bees. And so that meant this could be made, every detail, every contour had to be made in the wax. And then they had to figure out what sort of stuff to press against it and get all the contours and all the little lines and grooves. And that would be probably a mixture of clay, sand, and liquid. But I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it worked. And they would press that against, and now get that to take the image from the wax, and then you had to lose the wax. That's the easy part. Because on a hot African afternoon, you take that puppy and you set it next to your fire, and it won't take long for that wax to melt right out of there. Sorry. And now you have your basic way of, once you melt that bronze, you have a mold to pour it into. And so that is basically how lost wax casting is done, but it was a very difficult process to figure out. And they did it 200 years before the Europeans arrived. So these are 3 examples of lost wax casting. This is a kujua from the Ashanti of Ghana. Holds a whole lot of interesting, very valuable things to them. This is a Dogon piece. It will turn green next. This is the final color of bronze. The Statue of Liberty's got one more color to go. I don't think it's ever going there, but there's one more. Black is the final color, not green. And I believe when they do that 30-year cleanup of the statue and build a big scaffolding and spray it and get all the bird dew off it and all that, I think the last thing they do is spray it with something or wax it with something to keep the air off the surface so it stays green. That's why the Oni of Ife is so important, okay?
There you have it. There you have it. We have time for, okay, 2 more questions, because I don't want to keep y'all here too late. Oh, how are you gonna do this? You're right in front of me.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for the time and effort you put into the documentary, with all the panel's members coming through and answering questions. I can relate to the story that you're telling, and what comes to mind now is, we just got an oratory on sculptures and how our ancestors create in the now, for us now to look back and see what the story was then. And I know that what comes along with that is Proverbs. So my question would be to your father, if Baba doesn't mind, if he could give us a few proverbs from the Mapun people that help to keep the culture intact. Is that okay?
One that is normally very common is the story of the ant, and the fact that they said, don't be in a hurry, because slow and steady you will win the race. Slow and steady the house will be built. It doesn't matter your size. In the language it's said better, but translating it there.
Could you say it in your language?
Yes, they included this. That is, the ant that is small can build a big house, so don't see yourself as too small.
Can you say it again in Mapun, please, one more time?
Yes, that is, the small ant can build a big house, so it doesn't matter how small you are, you can build a big house.
There you go. Thank you so much. Please give him a hand.
Peace to everyone. I appreciate all the work that's been done. My question is, we saw several cultural components. We saw rites of passage. We saw we saw the religious practice before Christianity. We saw the nomadic practice. Nomadic movement is a practice of technology inside itself that the humans share. So I'm just curious, as your generation, you, your brother, others, even your cohorts, as you move through the space right now, this global space, what are the things that you are really planning to implement for the next generation? Because you're responsible for whatever is brought forward from the Mapun, like, you're responsible for it. So what's your plan?
Hey, I'm sure y'all can tell that was a heavy question, but I appreciate that. I think the question in itself is a charge. It's a charge that I've often needed someone to charge me up about that responsibility, because I won't lie, it's not been the coolest thing amongst my peers to want to go and talk to elders about history. Some people would consider that boring. They would consider that not important, So along the line, I've always come across elders that are happy anytime. And I think that's one thing that's gotten me going. Now, in terms of my plan, I think I came to realize that was my purpose. So in wherever I go or whatever I do, I've always felt the need to put a flag down that I am from this collective and this is who we are. This is where we're from. This is what we've gone through. Because anyone that's there in that moment will be able to learn from it, right? And also, anyone that's there in that moment could tell people in the future that, oh, I know someone that was from that region, and this is who they are. So the aspect of being intentional as an artist, for one, I sometimes I even try to tone it down, but it's my instinct to want to put either my language, regardless of how much I didn't speak it growing up, but just a few things. That's why I asked my dad to repeat the proverb so I can have it documented, and it's something that I can constantly repeat in my art, be it music or in photography or graphic design. Always retaining the culture in my art is one way that I've noticed is a solution to that, to putting it somewhere for future generations, because that's what a lot of this art has done, is it's taught us about the past. And so as a contemporary artist in the now, being able to carry what I've learned from the past into my present creative process is one way. The other way is in the educative strides, I think, going to different colleges and universities to have this documentary screened. During the film festival phase, a lot of where it was accepted was in colleges and in universities. And the reception that I got out of it was one that was encouraging, that there is a need to continue to spread this word out and teach people. So moving forward, that's what I plan on doing. That's my goal, is to package it into an educational resource that anybody could take this film to a group of people and they will have guided conversations like the conversations we're having on the panel within their groups. So that's one of the plans that I have. But I'm also still documenting. The story is, I was kind of scratching the surface, and it was very hard to distill everything that I was able to capture into this 89 minutes. Continuing to put it together and tell the story is what I plan to be committed to doing, you know. But thank you for that question. Yeah. And my charge to anyone that's an artist here, please do the same. We're needed in the world to, you know, keep it moving forward. We have one last question.
Thank you, Richie, and to everyone for your panel, the museum, and everyone who's attended. So, in a lot of ways, you've answered a lot of my questions, so I'm going to ask you, are there any words you can use to describe what you felt in your heart while you're recording oral history, ceremony, and celebration of your family and your people?
Wow. Man. Okay, any words to describe? While recording, the words that describe what I felt in my heart is, the first word would be enlightenment. But I want to phrase that more like re-enlightenment. I don't know how else to coin that, but a re-enlightenment is what I felt in my heart. I felt like I was learning something that I already knew, but I didn't know that I knew it in that way. So, so that re-enlightenment came with fulfillment, because it kind of fixed my posture. Bye. Thanks for coming. But it fixed my posture. I think there was a lot of confusion prior to that. Prior to being in the space of recording, there was a lot of confusion as to, you know, what are we, you know, as a collective. So that re-enlightenment is one. how do you describe, I felt, I don't know the exact word, but I felt closer to people that I may have just met for the first time. I felt closer to my family. Being away from home, that distance can play with your head, you know. So that closeness is one thing that I felt strongly. Being in the village, knowing that my dad walked like some of those places when he was a kid, and knowing that my grandfather and my great-grandparents were there, that closeness and that connection was something that helped with my purpose. And so yeah, purpose, re-enlightenment, connection, closure. It felt like closure. It felt like I was healing. I was healing some type of wounds that, I don't know, where, you know, I didn't realize I had those wounds until they started healing, in a sense. That part. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So that was the healing, reprioritizing my mindset. There's this materialist nature of society that would make you feel like certain things are more important than other things. Being at home, I really, really cherish the nature of family. And my family being big, and why am I tearing up? But, yeah, family, that's the final word that I'll end on, is family. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I thank the panelists. Please can you give them a round of applause? Thank you so much for joining me on this and sharing this moment with me. I really appreciate it. To everyone, please make it home back safe.